This is Radio Cairo, and we are coming from Studio 3. My name is Dr. Amr MABROUK. Dua Muhammad is at the control. And yes, this is the world of info. And today is the world of books, and we are presenting today two books. The rule of the game is my advice to you, whether you should read this book or skim it or just toss it. And usually, I'm sorry, I'm very biased. I always tell you that you should read this book. If you don't have the time, maybe you would like to listen to this summary of this book. And definitely today we have two interesting books. The first book is All the President's Money by Megan Gorman, and the second book is A Guest on Life by Mahmoud Yusuf Khadr. Well, two interesting books that goes around life and talk about the interesting times that we spent on this kindly earth. And yes, we should start right away with the book of Megan Gorman and All the President's Money. All the President's Money, I'm sorry. The book is really an interesting book. Well, who is Megan Gorman? Megan Gorman is a financial advisor. She usually is an expert in finance. She gives advice to rich people how to invest their money, how to arrange for their tuition fees for their children, should they go to an investment or not, should they buy these bonds or not. So she is an expert with money. And she has decided to write this book. Since 2016, she's been doing her research in this book. And this book was recently published in 2024. And this is an interesting book. It talks about all the president's money. We want to reach a conclusion about the American presidents. Who was good with his money for his own virtue? And of course, there were no thieves in the history of the United States of America presidents, but there were people who were interested in getting money or have come from humble origins, and then they became well off as they reached their presidency or after the presidency. So she's talking about their own personal money. What is the aim of that? I think it's a good history to know how the presidents of the United States, people who have taken one of the most important positions in the world, are having their say about their own money, how they made their fortunes, how they lost their fortunes, how they ended up by being very rich or sometimes poor. So how the men who governed America governed their money, this is the theme of the book. She starts the book with one of the greatest failures as regards the money, and he is one of the founding fathers of the United States of America, and this we mean Thomas Jefferson. He's an intellectual person. He's very cultured. He's very highly educated. He's so interested in books. He is the founder of the Library of the Congress, and he was also the one who was very generous when the Library of the Congress was burned in 1812, has donated or has even sold his books to the library and made a sort of endowment that and asked for voluntary work by a lot of people to donate to make the Library of Congress built again better than it was, and even having in it his own library. And yes, Thomas Jefferson was well known as a good servant of the community, servant of his country, and he's been sent to Paris before and after the revolution, and he was a very important envoy and definitely a man who has searched well with his personal needs and his family and his country needs, and definitely he has done his share of patriotism. This is Thomas Jefferson, the general person that we know, the founder of the University of Virginia, and of course a great man. We have talked about him in his work after finishing his tenure as a president, and how he has done great work in the philanthropy. But when we talk about his expense and his money that he has spent, we'll find out that he was a great spender. he has thrown about a lot of dinner parties, whether this was in France or later on, where it had the best possible food, the best wines, and he was always trying to impress people with throwing his own dinner parties. Whether this was in his tenure as a president, and we know that when you are visiting the President of the United States or having a dinner in the President's home, that is the White House, it is under the expenses of the President. So the government does not pay for this dinner parties that you're giving, but you personally as a president is paying for them. And this is a novel information for me. So if you have the the honor to be a guest on the United States president, actually you are real a guest. You're not real a guest of the government, but you are a guest of the president himself. He used to throw maybe 6 or 7 course meal, extravagant food, and yes, this has caused his bankruptcy, and definitely he has lost a lot of money, and he was almost broke by the end of his life. He was saved by some money given by the Congress or by the government in order to pay for his debts, but after his death, his inheritors had to sell his his state and his house in order to pay for the debts of Thomas Jefferson. Another person who was in the other side of being control of his money and financial situation is one of the presidents who was considered not to be a good, successful president, and this is Warren Harding. Warren Harding was the president of the United States. He was elected in 1920 elections and became the president in 1921, and he died prematurely with a heart attack in a young age. However, he had his own newspaper. He was a journalist, he was a lawyer, and he organized his fortune, and he died in 1923, and he was a president with no children. And this is really very amazing how such a president who was a failure as a president, and there was a lot of controversy of the people surrounding him who have really had a lot of financial problems. The president himself might not be involved in these financial crimes, but definitely he was marked by being unable to act, and I think he was saved by his definite heart attacks that happened. Another president who was not good with the money was Joe Biden himself, the president who has just finished his tenure in January. We find that he was coming from middle class. His tragedy of loss of his wife and daughter in a car accident has really shook him out and shook him up, and he is not a very good financial organizer, and definitely he has been buying and selling houses, and he was not that careful about his money. The other president is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln he's the man who has self-educated, and he is the man who has consumed a lot of time in reading books, in improving his status, and even had the chance to study law without a degree and be a practicing lawyer. And he is definitely one of the greatest presidents of the whole of the United States history. And you can see that when you go to Washington, D.C. and see the Lincoln Memorial, how he has this big statue out of life, being a real freer of slaves and the slave industry. And definitely his wife was a great spender. She ended up by losing a lot of money of his endowments, and she was a big spender of money, and yet he has dealt with that problem with great wisdom. John Adams as a president went to Harvard School and law school instead of being a minister, and he's part of the Radcliffe Harvard endowment, and he has got a real good chance of education that helped him very much to excel in gaining money, and at the same time building a career for himself. The presidents who didn't attend universities included George Washington, Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, Zachary Taylor, Lincoln himself, Andrew Johnson, Millard Fillmore, and Grover Cleveland, and even Harry Truman. Harry Truman, his father was a risk taker in his business choices, and he lost his son's tuition fees, and therefore his son never had the chance to go to college. Another president who, of course, the education is very important mark in improvement the fate of a president or a politician, and definitely if you, as the writer is saying, if you want to increase your chance of having money and increase the chance of success, you need to be married and stayed married. And the second important point is that you have to have proper education. Most of the presidents of the United States, even the ones who didn't have a official degree from college, had their own education planned, whether this was self-education or from their own experiences. And we can find a president like, for example, Ike. Ike had the chance of having coming from a family that his father was not able to bring the ends together. And Ike decided that he will go for education, and he was very much keen into properly educating himself, having a chance to apply for the St. Harris, for the West Point Military Academy, and his CV was so impressive for the senator that he accepted to nominate him, because every senator of the United States can recommend two of his states, one for three of his states. In the beginning, of course, there were only two academies, that is the West Point and Annapolis, the Navy Academy, and he would give this a nomination to the different people, and some of them would, like in case of Eisenhower, would make a sort of a short exam to see who is going to succeed and pass. And Eisenhower was the head of the people who applied for this scholarship, and he got accepted. His interest in education has definitely helped him even to improve with his strong ties with the President Roosevelt at that time. He was responsible for the act of GI Bill, which is in 1944, which was signed by Roosevelt, that every American person who has whether man or female, male or female, who has served in World War II for at least 90 days is entitled to have go to a proper education, university degree, and therefore all the school, the graduates from all the veterans of World War II had the chance to get a college education, and this has improved very much and enriched the middle class of the United States of America after World War II. And this was the lesson which was bitterly learned from what happened in World War I, when the huge number of veterans coming from the European theater were allowed to go back to their homes with a very small amount of money and no real actual career or future. And therefore, in 1944, with the Second World War, the lesson hard learned has been changed by Roosevelt, and by also the what Ike has helped Roosevelt to reach as a commander-in-chief of the Western theater. Another president who definitely has found his way to success through education was Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan had an alcoholic father, and therefore he was coming from a family that really economically has faced a lot of problems. He found out that education and proper education will definitely give him a chance to have a successful life. And he was having a girlfriend who was coming from a high social standard, having the chance to go to a college, and he went with her to visit the college, and she said to him, "Why don't you apply for education and scholarship because you're a good football player. And strangely enough, he was accepted to work, to have a scholarship in this school, and had the chance to graduate from a college, and even helped his brother, who was already working, told him, you also will have to find the same scholarship like me. And his brother got a scholarship through the same way that Ronald Reagan did. And this empathy towards the other people, or to the other members of the family, we have seen it also with Ike, who has sent his brother to education and asked him that he's going to support his brother by his own personal working. We can find that education is very important means of improvement the lives of the would-be presidents. Even George W. Bush, who is his family used to graduate from Yale and had this education. Also, George Bush didn't really take it for granted to have this education, and he went for it, and he graduated. Obama has chosen the difficult way. He has graduated from college in Columbia, and he applied for 2 universities for law. He got a full scholarship in Chicago and no scholarship in Harvard, and a very minimal scholarship in Harvard. He decided to go to Harvard because the reputation of Harvard and being a graduate of Harvard Law School will definitely change his life career and change his prospects. And he decided to go to Harvard, sacrificing the full scholarship that he was going to have in Chicago, just to have to build up in his career. And this is another very important task of being well focused as a president, and how to reach success and secure, of course, the money, which came later on, whether after leaving politics, by the books that he has signed, or by the first book that he has written in 1995, and later on it brought him a lot of money when he became a senator, which is the dream of my father. Now we can talk also about a president who was taken a bit backwards in his reputation, because he was considered to be the one who's responsible for the depression of the 30s, of the early 30s and late 1929. And by this we mean President Hoover. President Hoover was considered, and especially crucified, if we use the expression, by President Roosevelt later on, being incriminated to be the cause of depression, by not acting swiftly to prevent the depression, that economic depression that happened. And his reputation was really crucified, if we use the expression again. However, Hoover himself, on the successful way of life, was a very successful gentleman with his career in economics and his life, and he made some money before going before winning the elections in 1928. However, 2 important things that talks about Hoover and his stamina was his involvement in feeding of Europe after the First World War I. And in this special work, and being the head of the commission that helped to improve the feeding of the starving Europe after 1918, his role in this committee has definitely helped the world to survive this famine. And the same role he has taken up, and he was given this job by Truman himself, who didn't carry the bitterness against Hoover. And he did the same perfect job after the 1945 war, and he went around into different parts of the world collecting wheat and food supplies from Latin America, from other countries, to support the famine that was about to happen in Europe after World War II. And to mention what happened, even that he also has gone to Egypt and asked for some wheat, and the wheat, Egypt has donated wheat from its country to feed Europe in 1945-1946. When we talk about the presidents who really have lost a lot of money in their lives, like James Monroe, who as they called him, the broke president or the big spender. And the other presidents that were well known to be very cautious in the point of money spending and how they were able to save money and to make for themselves their own business was Ike. Ike, as they always say, he was able, or Eisenhower was able always to find a way to support himself and to support him and his family, but with full dignity. They say that he was a risk taker, but at the same time a very careful risk taker with very cool attitude, and this helped him as his job as the Supreme Commander on the Western Front, had to take decisions, calculated, very calculated decisions, and take real important risks. And they say he has no blood in his veins, only ice water, and this is another expression. Nixon himself also was another example of how he was able to collect and have some money to him, in spite of the fact that he was not a successful businessman in his early life. Another important president that helped himself to acquire good wealth after leaving the White House was Gerald Ford. He was able to secure a good income for him after leaving the presidency by going forward with a plan to write memoirs, he and his wife jointly. And this has secured to him a good amount of money, and this was responsible also for being taking care. And when he make a miscalculated step, like the coin that was marked by his to mark the centennial, the bicentennial of the United States of America, and this was not a successful venture, that he was accused of using the name of a president or an ex-president. He was able to correct himself and go further into different prospects of business without really harming his reputation. Another president that came after Gerald Ford was really an important president as regards how he managed his life. Jimmy Carter, people always thought that he was the farmer from Georgia, the man who was not rich and he was not making money, and he was a humble person. Actually, Jimmy Carter has another story to tell. He was a very bright young man who joined the Navy, and he was an engineer from the Annapolis Academy, and he was chosen to be an engineer in nuclear submarines. And this is something which is very, very competitive. It gives you an important role in the Navy, and you can easily have a very good income and reach very high positions in the Navy. He decided to give all this up when his father died prematurely from cancer pancreas. When he went back to attend the funeral and to attend the last days of his father before death, he found out how his father, the whole community, depended on him. He decided to resign his post in the Navy, get involved into the farm of his farm, to support the family and to support the people who worked in this farm. And he was able to arrange very good income in spite of early failures, and he became a rich man from this business of farming. His work later on definitely proved how important he was after giving up the presidency and losing the elections. In his philanthropy and all his work until he died when he was 100 years old definitely was a very important role as a man who through a humble economics background was able to arrange a real productive life of him, and an important myth that an important real job that he has done after the presidency, becoming one of the most successful presidents of the United States even after he lost the election. Now we can always talk about some other presidents who definitely have had an important job to keep, and they have a very bad legacy. And by this, for example, this President Polk, because he was the vice president of President Zakhari, who died prematurely from illness or from dysentery that happened to him, or something like cholera. And after his death, Polk became the president. And although Polk has made a lot of good things in his presidency, but he was selling and buying slaves, and this is, of course, is very, very definitely a very bad thing. Millard Fillmore is another man who was also involved in having slaves of his own, and this definitely is stigmatizing him, being the one who has signed the famous declaration of law that is, if people are slaves try to escape from their owners, they will be brought back by the police and returned to their owners. And of course, this is a law that was signed by him, and his reputation has been dulled very much after this, and people started to talk about this disaster that he has made, and even he tried to remove this guilt of this problem by going into different ways of charity after his loss of bidding for elections. Some other presidents definitely are having their job in philanthropy. For example, Kennedy, who was involved in a lot of activities of charity because he refused to take any salary, and his salary of about $100,000 that as a president he was entitled, he would donate this amount of money to other different charities like Americans, Boy Scouts and the Girls, Boy Scouts of America, and a lot of charities as well. This gives us an idea of how some presidents use their money for charity. Another famous president who used his money for charity was FDR, that is in the Springs Project, that he after getting his infection with polio and suffering from paralysis of his lower legs and lower limbs, he went for in these warm springs and found out that this could be really great help to the impoverished polio victims, and he helped very much to make this project and raise this project. Partially part of this project was for free for the affected patients. And of course, this gives you an idea of how some of the presidents have got involved in trying to improve their work, and definitely could really use their money for charity. The author gives us really in the end another method of talking and tell us so who were really the worst presidents for money and how they lost their money. And of course she tells us that the worst of the presidents in money and their own money control was Thomas Jefferson. And of course we told his story. James Monroe also, he ended up being in debt. And Biden, President Biden, who could not secure himself proper money. The best were, as regards their money and their control of money, were Ike, Reagan, Ford, and Washington, of course, and Herbert Hoover. Another note about George Washington is that he had slaves, but in his will he has written that the slaves should be released from captivity after the death of his wife, and his wife found out that very dangerous, because then the slaves could kill her to gain their freedom, and actually she decided to release all the slaves. So a real interesting book that talks about how the men who governed the United States of America governed their own money. It's an interesting book by an expert as a financial advisor and expert, Megan Gorman, and it's called All the President's Money. And yes, it's an interesting book. Stay tuned with us. We are coming from Studio 3. My name is Dr. Amr MABROUK. Dua Muhammad is still at the control, and After the break, we'll talk about it. So you're still listening to the World of Info, and we are coming from Studio 3. And the first book today was All the President's Money by Megan Gorman, and the second book is an interesting book. It's kind of philosophical book, and it's called A Guest on Life. And the writer is Mahmoud Yusuf. And he is a Palestinian who was, his family came from Jaffa, and his father and mother are Palestinians. His mother traveled to Palestine in 1948. And after the Nakba, she was forced to leave Jaffa. She came to Egypt, and there she met his father, who was also a Palestinian refugee living in Egypt after 1948, and both the families were involved in minimal or low trade of groceries, and they're having unfortunately lower middle class. He's describing how his families came from Palestine, from Jaffa, how they carried with them the famous key of their house, and how they thought that they will be away from Palestine for maybe a few days or a few weeks at the most. But as time flew, they knew that their life in Palestine is a past history, and it will never happen again, that they will return back to their own country and their own houses. This was extensively traumatic. The young couple met, and they got engaged, and they got married, and they married in 1952. They were living in the Zahir quarters in Cairo, and they were leading a life which was not that much of richness. They had their first daughter, and after 1 year of her age, unfortunately, this daughter passed away from typhoid. And later on, they started having children, and he was the first child to come in 1956. He would see his mother trying to bring the ends together. The father was working in the grocery shop, which he owned, and his mother was working as a tailor for women nearby to bring their clothes, and she would tailor them and do a lot of nice dresses, and in order to help to support the family. His feeling of need always have given him a hard time, and he's talking about his life and his work and his early age. At the age of 5, while he was playing with his children of the neighborhood, he suddenly scrambled and fallen on his head and ended by an injury in his eyes. And the family was so very much alarmed. They took this son of them with this injury in his eyes to all different aspects of physicians, who said to them, we can correct his vision, but we cannot improve that before the age of 10. And I believe as a physician, this problem was a problem of squint that has increased. Maybe it's not related to the accident, but to repair the squint, they cannot do this in early age of 5 years, so it was postponed till 10, and therefore he was forced to wear very thick glasses, and going to the school in this early age. He was, of course, applied with a lot of bullying from his friends for wearing this thick glass eyes, and definitely this was a big burden on the child. At the age of 10, the child was given the chance to do the operation, and it's nice of him that he has mentioned where he did the operation. He did it in the Demirdash Hospital, that's Ain Shams University Hospital, the same university that I worked there as a professor. And he has mentioned the name of the professor who did the operation for him. And yes, he was a very distinguished gentleman, Professor Muhammad Ibrahim. And he's saying that there was also a German professor expert coming on a short visit, and he did him the operation, and suddenly all his problems and visual problems have improved. And he started going to school, and he graduated later on from the law school, faculty of law in Ain Shams University. and worked as a lawyer for some time, having a diploma, and then traveled to Abu Dhabi, where he worked there and is living up till now there. So what is the book? So the first chapter of the book was talking about his life in Cairo and how he has suffered in the beginning and how he has always felt the need that they would really love to go back to Egypt, to Palestine one day. But he stopped at this chapter on talking about Palestine and went on talking about something else, about his visits to different cities and countries. And the second chapter, he was telling us about his experience into going to Montreal and spending some time there, seeing Montreal for himself, seeing how beautiful it is as a city, how the weather or the cold weather is forcing this beautiful city to live in the underground in the winter time, and how these different parts of the city underground can reach through underground routes for pedestrians. And he, although it had everything that a person would need to live in the underground to avoid going into the harsh atmosphere of -20 or -30, he felt that this is a very hard time. He has seen how these Canadian people are very nice to each other and even to foreigners, because they are all coming from foreigners. When he asked about a special type of food that's Canadian, he found nothing that is special, because all the foreigners and all the people who came from different parts of the world had their own cuisine with them, and therefore he found that very interesting. He also went to a very important church by the name of Saint Catherine, who was considered to be like a patron of the city of Montreal. But he also has given us the beautiful notion about Saint Catherine, the Egyptian martyr, the lady who in the 303 was against the tyranny of the emperor, of the Romanian emperor, and she convinced a lot of people to change into Christianity, and therefore he ordered killing her by the famous wheel, and how one of the monks dreamt that her body has been transferred to Sinai in the famous mountain, and there is the monastery that's up till now existing. So he is talking to us about different experience, and he said that this trip ended up by he and his family sitting, asking to have a Canadian passport, but it seems that their demand was refused, and therefore he was denied to have a passport or to go become an immigrant to Canada. Then he tells us about his trip to another place, which is Istanbul. The nice thing of the book is that every chapter he takes us to a special country or a special city, and he tells us some important points and facts about this city, and therefore informs us more about how people are behaving, and how what is the most important characteristic in a city that he sees or find out. He tells us about his experience in Istanbul, how it is tourist friendly, how there are a lot of nice food and a lot of expensive shopping places. And of course, he tells us about the famous mosques, and the Mosque of Sulaiman, the Sultan Sulaiman, how it has the different minarets and the number of minarets that are almost applying 4 minarets, and how every minaret is having, some of them are having 2 balconies and other are having 3 balconies, donating how that he is the 10th Ottoman Caliph, and he's the 4th after the taking up of Istanbul. So that's why it's 4 minarets, and how the fact that it is having these different balconies that makes the number 10 to become the 10th Caliph, 10th Ottoman Sultan. The city itself deserves to be visited, and after you read this beautiful chapter about Istanbul, about life in Istanbul, about food, and about recreational places, and about the Bosphor, you find yourself really wanting to visit Istanbul after what you read from his work. He tells us also about his different visits. He visited Edinburgh, which is a beautiful city, the capital of Scotland, and how this small city of 500,000 people receives in its famous festival of Edinburgh Festival in August another 500,000 people, which is a music and a dance festival and a book fair, which is beautiful, and about the special type of food, the Agnes, that people really like to eat in Edinburgh, and his walk in Princess Street and going to the Palmoral, visiting the citadel of Edinburgh, and seeing for yourself the beauty of Edinburgh as it approaches the shores of the Northern Sea, really makes you want to see more about Edinburgh. His visits to Tunisia and seeing the Zaytuna Mosque and tasting the different types of food, of course, made it a very interesting place to visit. And he takes us to a beautiful city by the name of Fas in Morocco. And in Fas in particular, we are going to see that there were three important people who lived there. And these people have really affected the history of the world and the culture of the world. Ibn Khaldun, who was born in Tunisia in 1331, and at the age of 20, after the death of his parents in plague, went to Fas and stayed for there, and he met the other important person, Ibn al-Khatib, who was born in 1313 in Granada and was living in Fas also in contemporary period with Ibn Khaldun, and Ibn Khaldun learned from him a lot. Ibn Khaldun then later on traveled to Egypt, and he arrived to Egypt in 1382, and he stayed in Egypt until his death in 1406, and he has written beautiful philosophy books and history books, and definitely his words of wisdom still live and still linger. And he was buried in a tomb just across from the Fatuh gate, but unfortunately the tomb has disappeared by time. Another important person who lived prior to Ibn Khaldun in Fas is Musa ibn Maymun. He was born in 1135 and later on traveled to Egypt to become the Grand Hacham of Egypt, a famous physician having his own synagogue and a great physician who met Salah ad-Din and was his own personal physician. So Ibn al-Khatib was also who met Ibn Khaldun and stayed he was born in Granada and then lived after becoming a minister of Ghani Billah. His Khalif was removed from the throne by Abu Yusuf, his brother, and Abu Yusuf started feeling jealous of Ibn al-Khatib, that he decided that he is going to try him being heretic. And of course he was not that heretic man. But unfortunately Ibn al-Khatib had to escape from Granada and went to Fas. And he stayed there in Fas and got more promoted and become near to his governor. Later on some prejudice happened to him and he was sent to court for the second time for accusing him of being heretic, and unfortunately he was killed. But later on his authority as a good religious man has been restored, but this was very late, and so up till now his tomb in Fas does exist. He describes to us his visit to Copenhagen and to Denmark, and he also gives us another important idea of visiting Oman and Mustadim, the famous port where they can find a lot of nice fish and food, and his visit to Konya, when he went especially to Ankara and from there to Konya, where there was Shamsuddin Tabrizi, and the times he spent near the tomb, and how he understood really the philosophy that we can see. The book is really a very interesting book, although it is a short book, only 100 pages, but it tells about the great culture and education that Mahmoud Yusuf Khidr has had in his life. And his book, The History of Islamic Art, which he has written and made him a winner of one of the most important trophies in Kuwait about writing books, definitely a book that deserves to be read. His experience in life, his trauma that he was subjected to whether from his eye ailment in young age or from what he heard about the country that they never lived in, and the city that his family escaped from, definitely acts a lot of burdens on him as a Palestinian living in different parts of the world. The lives and the times of Mahmoud Yusuf Khadr in this beautiful journey book is called A Guest on Life, a book that deserves to be read. So we're still coming from Studio 2. With this, we come to the end of our program of today, World of Info. And today we have presented in the world of books two interesting books, All the President's Money by Megan Gorman, and the second book, The Guest on Life by Mahmoud Yusuf Khadr. Two interesting books that deserve to be read. My name is Dr. Amr MABROUK. Dua Muhammad was at the control. Stay tuned to Radio Cairo, and hopefully we'll see you the same time, same station next week. Have a beautiful day.